Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope you are doing very well today. I'd like to take this opportunity, if I may, to speak to you about the film directed by Edward Yang. The film is from 1994, and it is called, in English, A Confucian Confusion. This is the film that Edward Yang directed in 1994. So in terms of the order of films in his filmography, this is the film that he makes after he makes A Brighter Summer Day. And this is in the early 90s. Now, I must say very quickly about this particular release. This is the Japanese DVD of the film Confucian Confusion. This only has Japanese subtitles. It doesn't have any English subtitles. And as far as I can tell, at this point in time, this particular DVD in Japan is no longer in print, so it's out of print at the moment. I don't know what the status is as to the availability of this film with English language support. I have a sense that it's probably very difficult to find on a physical media release. And if that's the case, that's too bad, because I think it is a film that is really worth exploring and engaging with. If I were to make any brief comments about this film, before I do that, let me say also that if you have any information about the availability of this work, I would very much appreciate it, and I'm sure many other people here might be appreciative of that information as well, because I think what I wanted to say very generally, without necessarily spoiling the work, is that I must admit that when I first saw this film, I thought it was a good film, but it wasn't as overwhelming an experience as, let's say, A Brighter Summer Day. In fact, I think very few films can claim to be that kind of experience when compared to that masterwork by Edward Yang. However, upon re-examination and re-engagement with this work, I think it is a really excellent work. It reminds me a lot of Shakespeare, in fact. I was really struck by how much it reminds me of a Shakespeare comedy, like Midsummer Night's Dream or something, because there's a lot of innuendo among the large group of characters here, and there's a lot of role reversal, and there's a lot of notions of mistaken identity that create these situations of comedy and drama, and sometimes the drama can get really deep and really intense, and sometimes the comedy can reach quite startlingly refreshing heights of comedy. So there's a real mix, a plethora, if you like, of tones and feelings and emotions, which is at the heart of the very best of Edward Yang's work, I would say. What we have also is we have a story that is set in contemporary Taiwan, Taipei, and so we have, again, a cast of characters that forms this tableau, this tapestry, this network of characters that are young, mostly, yes, young, I would say young, maybe 20-something, maybe a little bit older set of characters that are working, that are fairly well-to-do, if not very well-to-do, and they are concerned with relationships amongst each other and the like. So this is also at the heart of the very best of Edward Yang's work. The drama itself that it unfolds in this film is, as I say, very engaging. It reaches certain levels that can be described, I would say, as being Shakespearean. And I mean that in the Shakespeare comedy meaning of the word, which I think is a good thing. So this is all a very general impression, if you will, of this film, which I think is really deserving of attention and critical scrutiny and discussion. It's a film that is, I think, a very interesting, almost, it creates a nice through line with Edward Yang's modern works, so to speak. In other words, his dramas that he sets in modern day Taiwan or Taipei, Taiwan. So what are those works that we've seen thus far? We've seen this in That Day on the Beach, of course. We've seen this, of course, in the film Taipei Story. And we, of course, went a little bit back in time with the film A Brighter Summer Day, but now we return to the quote-unquote modern day with a Confucian confusion and all that entails. Remember, we are now in 1994, so the early 1990s. So a lot has happened, and now we are settling in to a kind of a more it has become a certain type of society now with its own tendencies and its own concerns that might be similar or might not necessarily be similar to those concerns that we saw in those earlier modern dramas of Edward Yang, That Day on the Beach and Taipei Story. So I think in that sense it forms a really lovely through line that we saw develop and flourish with those earlier works by Edward Yang. And now we see different, or maybe not so different, permutations on a theme, so to speak, which is modern day Taiwan, as it were, and the modern day issues and struggles that we saw unfold, or at least become engendered, and now are developing further, that we saw earlier. So what are these concerns and themes? Well, to give a couple examples, of course, it would be the idea of living and breathing in the ever rapidly developing Taipei, the city landscape, and the effect that this has on the nature of human core relationships. Are these two ideas of city living and trying to find some kind of a genuine relationship amongst human beings, are these compatible ideas or are they not? These are things that we were concerned with in his other works as well, and it's right at the fore of this film quite strikingly. There's also this notion of the identity of Taiwan in a sort of global sense, and also the relationship of Taiwan, or the identity of Taiwan vis-a-vis mainland China, and how that is manifest in the form of how various characters in this drama tend to view themselves and to view their inner circle, and also to view their role in this world, so to speak, not only vis-a-vis Taiwan, but also vis-a-vis mainland China. And it forms a really nice kind of discussion point, if you will, or it then creates this entry point of interpretation or discussion of this film, whereby you can look at certain characters and how they interact with each other and how they identify themselves, and we can see certain themes that emerge. In other words, relationships that are forged between people tend to be compared to or set in the sort of metaphorical context of certain historical consequences, or certain historical the historical background, if you will, between Taiwan and mainland China, for one thing. And also this idea, which is on a broader scale, I think, the notion of the relationship or the metaphorical context by which human relationships that are expressed in this film can be looked at or interpreted in a broader context of democracy, of the development of society over the landscape of significant historical events, and in particular significant historical events that punctuate Taiwan history and also Chinese history. And also bringing that into the context of a larger discussion about the notion of democracy and the democratization of society, and also bringing democracy back to the whole notion of what is the essence of democracy, right? Choice, right? The ability of choice and the freedom of choice and what that means and what are the consequences of choice. And not only do we see that in a broader macro discussion, if you will, but it's at the forefront here on a very intimate micro scale, the idea of choice in the context of human relations and human relationships, and also the choice: do we stay with this person or do we leave this person? Are we in love with this person or are we not in love with this person? And so I find that parallel interpretive ability as with respect to this film to be very fascinating, and thus it creates a kind of lovely thematic connection and connective tissue and through line with Edward Yang's earlier works. And so therefore that is the general means by which I would establish the case that this film, A Confucian Confusion, is really a stellar work, and it's a work that I'm very ashamed to admit I didn't give much credit to much earlier, but now I think about it more and I realize that it is a very important work in the context of the canon of Edward Yang's filmography. So with that, my friends, I think I would love to get more information, if you have it at your disposal, with respect to the availability of this film. If you know that this film is available, please let me know, and please let us know, and I would love to hear about it, because, as I say, the more people who are able to see this, the happier I will be, and because I think the more people see this, then the more possibilities will arise that this will be the subject of discussion. And really, I think it is deserving of that discussion, because there is a lot going on here, I think, a lot more than I could ever possibly hope to understand or comprehend. There's so much going on. It is actually very intricate, a plot. It is very tightly structured. There are so many implications at work, so many different characters at play, that it's like the butterfly flapping its wings, so to speak. The one little tiny change here would have drastic effects that will reverberate throughout the entire web and complicated network of characters and relationships that is established here by Edward Yang so masterfully in this film, A Confucian. So that is another way of saying that this is a rich, complex, and dense work whose subject matter is admittedly so, probably not so, how should I put it, heavy as, let's say, an earlier work like A Brighter Summer Day or even Taipei Story. But a work doesn't necessarily have to be heavy in order to have a certain kind of resonance, right? So I think that, and also, I of course, what am I saying? There's also the film Terrorizers. And, right, what's so interesting about Terrorizers and this film is that I think they present different tones of Edward Yang's prowess as a filmmaker, right? Because the film Terrorizers is admittedly a very dark film. It's an incredibly dark film. This film, I think, by contrast, while it presents certain themes that I think are similar in Terrorizers, it still presents it in a way that I think is a little bit lighter in tone. And that's where I bring in, let me reclaim the description of Shakespeare's comedies. It's almost like Terrorizers could be described as maybe a Shakespeare tragedy, whereas this could be described as a Shakespeare comedy. And as you know, Shakespeare, tragedy and comedies can deal with similar themes, and yet the output and the outcome can be quite different. So I kind of feel like, at least my own generalized notion and beginner level ability to comprehend Edward Yang's films are concerned, I feel like that's the kind of generalized approach that I feel operates with this film, A Confucian. And so, yes, with that in mind, I would strongly recommend this film, very much so, in the context of Edward Yang's filmography, most definitely. But also for anyone who is, if you liked the film Terrorizers, if you liked the film Type A Story, if you liked the film A Brighter Summer Day, then I can almost guarantee that you will like this film, A Confucian. You will like it very much, in fact. So that's my way of saying I hope that this film is available, and if it's not, I hope it becomes available soon. And if you do have any information about its availability, please let me know, and I would love to know that information. And hopefully, yes, more people will be able to see this film, Confucian. So what I will do now is I will next talk about some details of the film, just in case those of you who have seen it are interested. So you can stop this video now if you haven't seen it. Again, what I'm about to say next is just a specific discussion, but you don't have to worry about seeing the entire thing, this entire video. And I don't want to spoil this. I really urge you, if you haven't seen the film, you please stop this video now, because it's probably, I don't know if it's going to be worth it to you. But for those of you out there who have seen the film, and I know some people out there have seen this film, please feel free to stay, and I will be talking a little bit about my thoughts about specific points of this film. So yes, so if this is the end for you, for this video, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. But for those of you who have seen Confucian, please stick around and let's talk about this film from 1994, Edward Yang's A Confucian. Okay, so you're still here, so that means that you have seen A Confucian, and so hopefully this might be a discussion that maybe we can have together going forward, because I find this film, as I said, to be very complicated, quite complex, because there's so many different characters at work here, right? There's Chi-Chi, Ming, Akim, Molly, Larry, Li Ren, Feng, and also Ming's father, and his father's in a new relationship, and also there is Molly's sister and the sister's husband, who is a writer, and there's also the artist Birdie, and there are all these other characters that work here that all form, and also there's Ming's boss, the government bureaucrat, the chief, who is very important, and so all of these form different, I think, structural and metaphorically significant focal points within the context of this film that presents this wider landscape that is, I think, significant both in structural character narrative terms, of course, directly speaking, but also broadly speaking in more metaphorical, allegorical terms. And so this is nothing new with Edward Yang's works, right? Because we've seen this at play so masterfully in his previous works, Terrorizers, A Brighter Summer Day, Type A Story, etc. So I think it's on display here fully, and I think there are admittedly situations that I think are maybe a little bit of a quote-unquote comic tone or lighter tone. I would draw your attention, for example, to the character of Akim, who is a very, I would say, he is ultimately a very a funny character. In the end, he's a very sympathetic character, right? Because, and he's a very interesting character, though. And in other words, because he is a comic character doesn't necessarily mean that he is insignificant, right? I would say, on the contrary, that a character like Akim who on the surface might seem to be maybe, how should I put it, lightweight, I think on the contrary provides a lot of commentary that is very rich in terms of the context of this film. Because on the one hand, he is a character that at the very beginning seems to express this idea of a modern relationship. In other words, he seems to be able to advocate a modern kind of marriage. He's not married to Molly yet, but he is, at least when he's talking to Larry, he seems to be suggesting that he is okay with this idea of marrying Molly, but yet they have maybe different lifestyles, or they don't necessarily have to be a traditional marriage, and so there doesn't necessarily have to be this traditional notion of love that exists between the two of them, and so he very interestingly compares it to like one nation, two systems, comparing it to China and Taiwan in a very interesting way, two systems. And here it's the notion being you have this one relationship, yet two systems or two lifestyles. The concept being that it's a modern relationship that doesn't necessarily have to survive on the notion of traditional love and togetherness, so to speak. But the irony of Larry's situation is that and also one other thing about Larry is that, again, he seems to think that the way to get out of trouble and the way to solve problems is by money. He says he always offers to pay money to people in order to solve problems that occur throughout the film, which is a very funny concept because it's presented in a way that is very comic, but at the same time, this is, I think, a very key concept because it seems to suggest here that we are now in a society, we are now in a world that operates almost on a kind of transaction type of basis. You do something for me and I will do something for you in return. You do a favor for me and I will pay you money. We see this not only in the mindset of Akim and how he treats money and the issues that emerge in his life, but we also see certain kinds of transactional relationships afoot with respect, for example, to how Larry seems to be doing some kind of how he deals with people in his life, how Feng seems to be dealing with certain relationships in her life. She's trying to get ahead, so to speak, so she's trying to maybe operate on perhaps a transactional sort of basis. And I think that forms a nice contrast to the other relationships that we see. In other words, we see, and also the transactional relationship seems to emerge with respect to Ming and Li Ren, and also the government work and the construction contracting work that emerges. You do something for me and I will do something for you in return. But note how whether or not those relationships are successfully portrayed or portrayed in a successful light or not, because not all the relationships in a Confucian Confusion seem to be operating on that kind of basis, right? Because there are other relationships here that are trying to operate on a more, how should I put it, for lack of a better phrase, a traditional or fundamentally emotional core-based relationship. The key relationship, of course, being Chi and Ming. But what's interesting is that I think Edward Yang seems to be posing a question that doesn't have an easy answer, right? Because even with the quote-unquote traditional relationship between Chi and Ming, that relationship is actually quite unstable. It is quite unstable because we see them fighting a lot and we see them not necessarily getting along. And so question, if you will, the possibilities or the notion of whether or not that kind of relationship can indeed survive in this modern society, especially when considering the fact that Ming especially seems to be considering or placing that kind of traditional relationship in the context of choice. This is very important, I think. This idea of how can the notion of choice and the notion of creating emotional bonds between people, are those concepts always in sync with each other? Or can they sometimes clash or collide with each other? I would suggest that the answer for Edward Yang, at least as he presents it in the different permutations of the relationships here in A Confucian Confusion, is that it depends. It depends. And that perhaps can be a kind of byproduct, if you will, or an unintended consequence, whether good or bad or something in between, of this notion of choice, free will, democracy, if you like, which I think is very fascinating. So, and then you contrast that with the other side of the coin, which I mentioned earlier, which is this idea of a transactional relationship. But are they really in contrasting with each other, or is there a more closer connection to those two concepts than meets the eye, right? Because, right, this idea of transactions and favors and money exchanging hands, I mean, that is also based on a choice, right? You choose to pay, or you choose to accept something, or you don't. So I think it is all this kind of, not necessarily smoke and mirrors per se, but it is this thing that Edward Yang does so brilliantly, is that he seems to be able to present certain differing points of view that seem on the surface to be differing and clashing, but at the same time, upon further inspection, they seem to be more in congruity with each other than meets the eye. But then the more you think about it, the more you realize, are they really that similar? Or maybe there are indeed certain fissures and certain disagreements that form amongst these different systems, right? The two systems, one nation, two systems, as Akim seems to suggest early on with Larry, right? So this idea of duality or polarity, and is there harmony in that polarity, or is there a clash? Is there an incompatibility in that polarity, or is there something in between, or is it always in flux? These sorts of questions come up constantly, and then it forms this overriding tension in the film that is such a dramatically enriching experience as a viewer, right? Because we're constantly being bombarded with these seemingly differing tones that creates this tension within us. And so this is brilliant, absolutely brilliant way in which Edward Yang explores the narrative and explores certain themes via the characters and their development. And so we've seen this so far right now, just in a quick discussion of Akim, Chi-Chi, and Ming, and to a lesser extent, Larry and Feng. So, wonderful. So where should I go next? And I didn't even mention the character of Molly, who is obviously very important to Akim, right? Because just to continue with this discussion, we have Akim and Molly, and they seem to be a very unconventional couple. They're not married yet. They don't seem to be in love with each other, although it's very interesting because Akim at the beginning seems to, at least on the surface, to be he doesn't care about love. He doesn't necessarily need to have love in the relationship. But as the film progresses, we realize that he really needs love, and that he is really love-struck, and he's really upset when he's confronted with these rumors that Molly is having an affair with Birdie. And so we see the effect that it has on him, and he's devastated, which is a very comic thing, right? Because we realize that he is not really what he says he is. He is actually a man who has more feeling than what he made himself out to be earlier in the film, which is, I think, very endearing and makes his character to be very charming and very likable. And he's very likable, especially by the end. He becomes a very likable character, and he becomes so focused on Molly and on getting back at Birdie. And so that creates more comic scenes, right? There's a great comic scene where he basically attacks Birdie in the TV studio with Molly's sister. And also there's a scene at the end where he tries to confront Birdie in Birdie's studio, and he's calling from down there, and he's calling, and by that time all the plot intricacies have led up to this moment where Feng is up there, but they don't know it. And Larry and Feng obviously have this thing, but Larry doesn't know that Feng's up there. And so Akim is calling on the phone, and he hears the woman's voice, and he immediately falls in love with the woman's voice, and the woman identifies herself as being the assistant of Birdie. And then when they go up there, Feng has already left because she's just had a big fight because Larry's gone up there, and they've argued, and Larry's upset that Feng has been with Birdie, and so she leaves early, but Akeem doesn't know this, and Akeem goes up there, and then he has a fight, kind of has a resolution with Larry, and then he sees the assistant, who wasn't the person speaking on the phone. She's the woman who is so almost pathetically in love with Birdie, but it's an unrequited love situation because Birdie doesn't have any romantic interest in her. So she's presented as being this pathetic woman, but she is suddenly the subject of Akeem's love and affection. It's amazing. This turn of events that I've just described is quite simply just an amazing thing. And it's just about Akeem, who is arguably a secondary character in this film. This is what I mean when I say this film reminds me of Shakespeare comedy, because just thinking about that subplot alone, you look at all the twists and turns, the way characters change positions. They go from being heroes to villains. They go from being jilted lovers to successful lovers, or they go from being sort of Machiavellian to being very heartbroken, all in an instant, or within the span of just these few moments. And the range of emotion that occurs just within this landscape of the subplot is astounding to me, absolutely astounding to me. And granted, it's a very comic situation, but it's an indication of the storytelling prowess of Edward Yang that we see on display here, full force, with an energetic verve that I think is just, at this point, unstoppable in terms of Edward Yang's powers. Amazing, absolutely amazing. The same kind of narrative trickery, for lack of a better phrase, I think is at display and in the other plots and subplots and plot strands of the film. For example, we see the plot involving Ming and Li Ren and Chief, and in his work, and we see that there are certain forces at work that are trying to push out Li Ren, and we don't know this until the end. And in fact, the chief, who seems very nice to everyone, is in fact perhaps the biggest villain of this piece. And he is so villainous by virtue of the fact that he seems to represent some kind of authoritarian or bureaucratic-based villain, which is perhaps some of the more villainous roles in this world, right? Because he comes at you with smiles, but he is really going to get what he wants. And what he wants in the immediate is the ousting of Li Ren. And there's a sort of kind of plot that is hatched against Li Ren, right? Li Ren must be made to do some fiddling with some official documents so that he can become in trouble, and then that would be cause for him to get fired. And what is the reason for him wanting to fiddle with the documents? Well, we have this situation that arose at the beginning of the film with respect to a certain contractor, I think, that was behind with a contract, and it caused certain delays, and certain delay damages were incurred. So, but the person had a daughter, and he tried to appeal to Ming's humanity in order to just maybe have Li Ren do a little bit of fiddling and just save his bacon, so to speak. And so Ming convinces Li Ren to do the fiddling, and that's what causes the reason to arise for the chief to oust Li Ren. And so that is a line, that is maybe a darker element of this film, at least compared to the Akeem subplot, because it shows the real human consequence of trying to do something good. It shows a real nefarious element in government, if you look at this bureaucracy, this office as being a representation of government. What was it? What was the phrase that's used? Clean water does not breed fish. And so the notion here being that there is a level of corruption that is known to all, but no one says anything against it. Ming also realizes that he is perhaps becoming under the thumb of this chief, because the chief knows that Ming's father had some criminal past. He was arrested and put in jail for some kind of embezzlement. And so Ming's father's past, and thereby Ming's past, is somewhat colored. And perhaps this means that the chief, what I think of that is that the chief wants to wants Ming to like him, so that the chief can control Ming, right? Because the chief knows that there is some kind of leverage that he has over Ming, namely the situation with Ming's father. And so this seems to suggest that there is something very nefarious in this world. I mean, it is the world that is painted in a Confucian Confusion is not all sunshine and roses. It can be a very dark place. So I think it is very dark when it comes to this particular episode of the film. But with Ming, we have a very interesting situation, right? Because he is a young man who is working in this, who is working here in this, what seems to be this government office of some kind that is dealing in some kind with construction and contract work, construction contracting work. And so this seems to be tying in with Taiwan, Taipei, and the urban development of Taiwan and Taipei in the society. So he seems to be at the heart of this. So it's very interesting that the chief, who is also at the heart of this office, is ultimately painted as being the most corrupt character of this entire film. So food for thought. But also this notion of Ming being at the center of this government-based world makes it easy to understand why Ming as a character is the one that relies most on these concepts of comparing his life and comparing his choices to events in Chinese history, events in Taiwanese history, also comparing his relationship with Chi-Chi to that of democracy and choice. Remember, it was that scene with her and him in the elevator where they have that huge argument after that is started basically by him wanting to have her tell Molly that Chi-Chi will leave her job, right? That's the whole start of it. Although you can get a sense that probably their dissatisfaction with each other in this relationship started much earlier. But in any event, there's that great argument that they have, Chi-Chi and Ming, in the elevator. And they are talking, and he's talking about democracy, and Chi-Chi, you must choose. Basically, you must choose between me and Molly. And he's also insulting her, saying, you don't deserve to have any rights. So all of these notions that he's bringing into his relationship with Chi-Chi are notions that are borrowed from fundamental concepts of democracy: choice, rights, no rights, etc. And so he is the one bringing it in. So it's very interesting that he, being at the center of this plot involving the government contracts, is the one bringing in these notions of democracy and historical context. That brings me to, I think, one of the tender relationships in the film, that being Chi-Chi and Molly. I think Molly is a very fascinating character, right? Because Molly seems to represent, I mean, she has her own company. Granted, of course, it was a company that seems to have been bestowed upon her by Akim as a kind of, I don't know, engagement present or something. I'm not sure, but she has this company, and it's and she is also working with her sister, who seems to be a successful TV show host, and they have connections with the entertainment industry, of course. There's Birdie, who seems to be a client, but also there is the relationship that they have with the sister's husband, who is a very famous writer, although he lately has been writing books that are not as popular as his earlier books. and he seems to be a bit of a recluse. And right, the writer and the sister are married, but they seem to have a kind of a distant relationship that is slowly but surely becoming the subject of some gossip columns. Also, the writer has been accused of let's focus on this for instance. So Molly is the head of this company, and she seems to be very hot-headed. She seems to make rash decisions. She doesn't seem necessarily to think with her head. She seems to act on her emotions more than anything else. But she is at heart I think she is a very sincere, earnest character. And her instincts are right most of the time, right? Remember at the beginning, she was the one who basically on instinct decided to fire Feng on the spot. And she fires her, and Feng takes it very dramatically, and she starts crying. And so early on in this film, it's almost as though our sympathies are with Feng and not with Molly, right? Because Molly was the one who fired her. But ultimately, we realize later as the film progresses, because we understand that Feng and Larry have this relationship, and Larry seems to want to use Akim to get back at Molly for some reason. But in fact, Feng is also antagonistic against Molly, and it's Feng who uses Larry so that Larry can use Akim to get back at Molly. You see that? So in essence, if we look at it in that kind of Machiavellian human relationship context, Larry seems to be a villain here, but in fact, we can get a glimpse of a situation such that we can interpret the film to mean that it is indeed Feng who is a more villainous villain than Larry. So Feng is almost like the Lady Macbeth to Larry's Macbeth. I always thought that Larry was a bit like Iago in Othello, but I think the Macbeth, Lady Macbeth comparison might be more apt, especially because I think Lady Macbeth, as the instigator of a lot of the trouble that arises in the play Macbeth, is not dissimilar to the way in which it seems to be suggested that Feng has instigated a lot of the antagonism that has occurred vis-a-vis Larry, Akim, and Molly, and it seems to be based on the fact that Feng does not like Molly. Okay, so what does that mean? That means Molly, when she fired Feng, her instincts were correct, right? Because Molly was basically firing someone who is, in a kind of a distant sense, her quote-unquote enemy. So I thought, so therefore Molly seems to be showing a lot of instinct. And also, we see that Molly does want a kind of emotional bond between her and other people. Right? She seems to pride this among everything else. She seems to pride this emotional connection more than anything else, which is what I was trying to refer to earlier, this idea of, is it really possible to have emotional connections in this ever-growing urbanized environment that is Taipei? Right? Because when she gets to, right, for example, that's what she prides most with respect to her relationship with Chi-Chi. It's that idea of loyalty between friends, right? Because she really values the loyalty that Chi-Chi seems to show her, not just because Chi-Chi works for her, but because Chi-Chi is her friend. Also, when Molly gets together with Ming, right? Molly wants him to tell her he loves her. And it's the fact that he is unable to say that makes her very upset at him. And this is after they have slept together. So that seems to suggest that she wants some kind of emotional core relationship. And is she able to get that? It's hard to say. By the film's end, her relationship with Chi-Chi seems to be altered, perhaps fundamentally so, but there seems to be enough optimism, room for optimism, and room to suggest that perhaps the relationship will continue in some positive way. It's not clear as to Molly's relationships with, let's say, Akim and Ming. Perhaps they won't continue. All right, Molly and Akim break up at the end, but they seem to break up, and they seem to be mutually okay with that. But yes, but Molly's a very interesting person, right? She seems to be the one who is right, representative of a kind of working person here, because she has her own company, but it was bestowed upon her, and yet she doesn't necessarily display a strong work ethic, but she is very sincere and earnest, and she wants something that is emotionally genuine. And question whether she's able to achieve that in the end. I would say that perhaps it is something that is elusive to her, and I'm not sure if she'll be able to obtain it anytime soon. But in any event, that seems to be where her character is placed within this labyrinthine narrative. Which brings me therefore to Chi-Chi. And she is the do-gooder. She is the one that is likable. She is the one that is so likable that people seem not to like her, right? They seem to think that she is too good to be true. With her, she's described as having those good looks and cute dimples and all that. But is she really too good to be true? And I think people tend to distrust her because of the fact that she seems so nice, which is an interesting kind of paradox. And it's sort of an existential sort of paradox that seems to plague her character. And thus, I think, forms an interesting way the source of her confusion, because she really doesn't know what she wants, right? She really doesn't know what she wants. Does she want to stay with Ming, or does she want to leave Ming? Does she want to stay with Molly, or does she want to leave Molly? I mean, she is really in the crossroads of making certain decisions that will affect the rest of her life. And this is where we find her during this film. And it's a fascinating portrait because she is the ultimate embodiment in this film of this idea of uncertainty. What to do? I don't know. And wherever you turn, you're getting different advice. And that makes the decision even more difficult. She tries to find guidance with the writer. She doesn't seem to find it. She tries to find guidance with Ming. She doesn't seem to find it. She seems to try to find guidance with Molly, but she doesn't seem to find it. And so where is she left with? She's left basically by herself, trying to figure out what it is that she's going to do. And I find that to be very fascinating, right? Especially when we return to the concept of democracy and choice that was brought up by Ming. Right? You must choose, he says. But if we think about Chi-Chi, why must she choose? Right? Why must she choose? Is it because she must choose because she wants to choose? Or is it because she must choose by virtue of the fact that she is asked to choose? If it's the latter, then is that really choice? I would argue not. If it's the former, that would probably be a more reasonable argument that her choice is indeed her choice. It is true democracy. Right? So all these things kind of swirl, metaphorically speaking, around the character of Chi-Chi, so that by the end, we are left with the final resolution between Ming and Chi-Chi, which is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, the way that relationship develops and ends. Note that their choices, or the way in which she deals with Ming, the relationship, are all handled in elevators, right? So there's that huge fight that they have in an elevator, and then she leaves, and that basically is the end of their relationship. And then there's the elevator scene at the end of the film, which is in the hospital, after Ming's father has been admitted. And they have that wonderful scene at the end where they're basically acknowledging that they're breaking up. And so she leaves, and that is signaling the end of the relationship. But then the doors close, and then there's a moment where Ming thinks, and then opens the door, and the door's open, and she's there. She has chosen to come back. Now, question whether or not that means that they will be together. I think there's enough ambiguity in that moment to suggest that it could go either way. They could be just friends. They could maybe come back together. Who knows? In any event, the future holds what the future holds for these characters. Right? I guess it all depends on how well they get along at Denny's. But in any event, what I love about that is that, right, all throughout the film, she is shown to have trouble knowing what it is she wants. Therefore, she's having trouble choosing what it is she wants. But it is at these two moments, these elevator scenes with Ming, that she is shown to express her choice. She chooses to leave. and then she chooses to come back. And what that choice means is still ambiguous enough that we can interpret it in many ways. Does she choose to come back to form another relationship with Ming? Does she choose to come back to acknowledge that the relationship is ended, but they will leave on good terms? Or does she choose to come back for some other means? Who knows? That's what I love about this film, is that she is shown to choose, but it is not necessarily expressed directly as to what she has actually chosen. And in fact, the choice, therefore, becomes subject to interpretation. And that's wonderful because it protects the individualized nature of the choice, if you know what I mean. In other words, Chi-Chi's choice is hers and hers alone. And who are we to try to invade her mind to try to figure out what it is that she has chosen? And I think that's the wonderful mysterious and charming quality of Chi-Chi as a character, right? We want her to make a choice, but in the end, she has made a choice. What is that specific choice? We're not exactly sure, but it doesn't really matter in the end because we know she's made the choice. And who are we to inject ourselves into her mind? Because right, she's been shown to have so much struggle throughout this film in trying to choose what it is she wants. She doesn't even know what she wants, and I think she says as much when she's with the writer. And so I think this is perhaps Edward Yang's way, and I'm speculating here, of course, but this is perhaps Edward Yang's way to show a certain respect to his character. In other words, it's maybe a way to say, please give these characters the respect that they deserve. Right? We've spent all this time with them, but now it is time to respect their privacy and to let them be who they are. And in fact, this is the moment where the film ends. And we leave this world of these characters. And so we are left wondering what will happen to them. We don't get any direct answers, but we never do with Edward Yang's films. And I think that's the way it should be, because that leaves things up in the air, and that's a perfect representation of how human life is and how human life can be, and the uncertainties that can unfurl and unfold before our very eyes. And that's something that I think makes us inherently and fundamentally human. Okay, so I think there could be more that I could talk about with this film. And I guess, right, I mean, what are some things I could talk about? I mean, again, going back to the notion of characters seeming, they're changing before our very eyes. It's amazing. For instance, I find the character of Li Ren to be a character that seems to be seemingly unsympathetic at the beginning, but he turns out to be very sympathetic by the film's end, or by the conclusion of that particular arc when he is fired. The same is true for Feng. I find her character to be very sympathetic at the beginning, but she turns slightly unsympathetic towards the middle. But then she comes back and becomes very sympathetic at the end, because we realize that she is an artist and she's an actor and she wants to succeed, and she's having trouble doing so. The same is true for Birdie. I find Birdie to be a bit of a slightly unsympathetic character at the beginning, but he turns into a very comic character, and then at the end he is very he seems to be a very interesting character. So there is this wonderful flow. The same is true for Molly's sister, the TV show host. She seems to be very stern at the beginning. She doesn't show any love or concern for her writer husband, but when she visits her writer husband, there's a really poignant scene between the two of them, or she basically expresses her love and the fact that she really loved him. And he's become this recluse, and they've had this rather estranged and strange relationship. But I love that. I love the way that the sister's character turns in this way that becomes very poignant and very intimate. The same is true for the writer. My goodness, the writer is this recluse. He's very odd. He seems to be a little bit out of it. And I think the assumption being that a long time ago, he had received a kind of a fortune telling, whereby he was told that he would be in a car accident. And I think that's the implication, being that he is recluse because he doesn't want to go out and have that have that fulfilled, as it were. Whereas in fact he does go out after he becomes sort of infatuated with Chi-Chi, and he becomes love struck with Chi-Chi, but then he gets hit by a car, and then he's okay, and now he seems to have a new lease on life, and he seems to be optimistic about life again. So his role has changed, which is fascinating. The same is true for Ming. Ming seems to be a very likable person at the beginning, but his outbursts of anger towards his mother, towards his father, towards Chi-Chi, tend to make him very unlikable. But by the end, he seems to have lost everything. He's left his job. He seems to have lost Chi-Chi. So then he becomes a rather sympathetic or pathetic character by the film's end. The same is true for Chi-Chi. She seems to be very likable, and as I say, she has cute dimples, as one character puts it. But we see her maybe through the lens of other characters, and maybe she tends to become a little bit unlikable towards the middle, but then we realize her sincerity by the film's end, and then she becomes likable again. The same thing with Molly. We see her at the beginning very aggressive, very forthright, but also seemingly thinking more with her emotions rather than thinking coolly and calmly and collectively. And so therefore she becomes a little bit unlikable at the beginning, but then she becomes very likable at the end, I think, especially when we see her engaged with her relationship with Chi-Chi, for example. We see her yearning for love vis-a-vis Ming. We see her and her kind of matter-of-factness as she resolves the relationship with Akim at the film's end. So she's a really wonderful, rich character. I really love the character of Molly. And the same is true also for Larry. Larry is seen as a kind of conniving character at the beginning. He seems to be caring only about, business and investments. He says, like a company's financial statements are like an indication of character or that sort of thing. Investment in companies like investing in people. So everything is very transactional and cold. And in fact, he's revealed to be a bit of a villain, kind of Iago of the piece, if you will. But in the end, he succumbs to his own tendencies of jealousy, right? Because the things that he was trying to egg Akim on, in other words, he was trying to spur Akim on by trying to encourage Akim's jealousy of Molly, that turned against him, right? Because in the end, he became so jealous when he saw Feng in the studio of Birdie. So he assumed in his head that Feng and Birdie were having some kind of fling. And so he became jealous. So that was wonderful. The tables turned on him. So the tool of jealousy that he was trying to use, the weaponization of jealousy, in fact, turned against him, and he became the victim of his own weapon. So that by the end, he was rejected, and he was rejected in great comic style, pushed into the elevator by Akim, who says goodbye, adios. And so, so Larry is kind of a villainous character, but he's a comic villain, I think. And so in the end, he gets his just desserts in a way that is, I think, comic, but also very narratively satisfying. So these are all examples of just the way in which these characters tend to flip-flop and turn on each other, or not turn on each other, but tend to change over the course of the narrative, which is a fascinating aspect. And finally, I should say that the film is filled with all these little details that come up again in that wonderful Edward Yang fashion. One of the ones I love is, remember the way in which Feng initiates conversation with Ming outside of the nightclub. She says, "Oh, I've lost my contact lens," or something, and that sort of courts Ming's sympathy, and then they start talking. Well, we realize that is a little trick that she uses, because later when she's with Birdie says that, "Oh, I remember how we met, and it was fate. Your contact lens fell out," or something like that. And so that immediately indicates that the contact lens thing is a little trick that Feng uses to basically start conversations with men, or initiate relationships with men. So I think that's a very interesting little detail that comes up. So it's something that is, the seeds are sown at the very beginning or early on that pay off later on in the narrative. So that's a little example. What are some other examples of that kind of narrative storytelling? The scene, also the scenes and it's not quite this sort of narrative storytelling, but also what's great about Edward Yang is his use of ellipsis and his use of not showing information or leaving it up to us to determine what's going on. I think the prime example of this being the whole story of Li Ren and Ming and the contractor. Remember, at the beginning, we see the office, Li Ren and Ming, and we see this one other guy in a black coat and with glasses, and he seems to really want to talk to them, but they seem to brush him off. We don't quite know what's going on, but then we realize there's information about a contractor who was late and penalties were incurred or something like that. So and then we see Ming at home or with his mother and his uncle at night, and then we see that same person coming in with his daughter in his arms. And so that's all we see, but the implication is clear. This is the person who is under a lot of trouble for some reason, for being late or something with a contract. And so he needs to appeal to Ming's humanity, otherwise he will be in a lot of trouble or he will go bankrupt or something. And he uses his daughter in order to get to Ming to therefore convince Li Ren to do a little bit of fiddling with the numbers, which is what in fact happens, which then causes the downfall of Li Ren. But all this is implied. It's never presented directly in terms of the narrative. So Edward Yang gives us just a little bit of information, but then leaves it up to us to put the pieces together in our mind, which is, again, so wonderful about Edward Yang's filmmaking. And we've seen it before, Terrorizers, with Brighter Summer's Day, with Type A Story, but we see it here in full force in Confucian. So, my friends, I think I will leave it there. I think I've spoken at length about this film, but I think I could go on, but yes, I could go on for a long time about this film. I really do think it's a film that is much better than I had originally thought it was. So it is a stellar film, highly recommended. If you have any thoughts or comments about this film, Confucian, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I would love to hear what you have to say. Thank you very much for putting up with me and my long-winded comments. I apologize if my manner of speaking tends to be a little bit drawn out, but I hope you can forgive me. It's just my way of trying to express to you how much I really adore this film and the works of Edward Yang in general. So anyway, my friends, thank you very much, and I hope you're doing well. And next time, I hope to see you where we can talk about the film Mahjong. So until then, my friends, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. Until we meet again, my friends. Cheers.